We gathered together to worship on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. As we gather, we acknowledge the Wattle, the Cockatoo, and this bend in the Burrung River were taken without consent or negotiation. We give our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And we pledge ourselves to work alongside these First Peoples to achieve a just future for all.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for that absolutely glorious acknowledgement of country. Leslie, as many of you know, has a little baby who was once in womb and blessed here, and then gave birth and became Jesus, and now is a toddler, a tyrant. So anytime she manages to do anything at all, it's like a miracle. So thank you, Leslie. Sweet Jesus, says the poet Mary Oliver, sweet Jesus, talking his melancholy madness on the boat. So tender, so luminous, so demanding, and 10,000 times more frightening than the killer storm. We gather in worship today to hear stories of storms and boats and becalming and wild winds. In Melbourne, we have lowered our sails. No journey beyond our kin or ken, but still we see from our becalmed boats the wild world around us. We see Beirut, the debris flying, the people dying as the rubble falls like rain upon their heads. Oh God, those weeping fathers and mothers and sisters and brothers, oh God, hold them. Hold them as they stand in ash, all hope now dashed upon the stones. Ah, Beirut, we hold still for you. My friends, every day the world offers herself to us, and sometimes she is very frightening and filled with gushing pain. And every day our job is to turn up, to pay attention, to not be afraid. And part of the act of worship, worshipping together in spirit, if not in body, is to give of ourselves to each other as community in this moment. And so this morning or this evening or this afternoon, whenever you're watching this, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Nikki, who is going to be preaching for us today. Nikki is a long-standing member of St Andrews. She was married here. She birthed her babies here. She's been doing her period of discernment here, became a lay preacher here, and is exploring the possibilities of ministry beyond this place. So I invite you to open your hearts when Nikki preaches for us in a little while.
A reading from Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God."
So, for the children's talk this week, Nikki and Ginger came up with a little story about a teddy bear who is feeling very frightened and very alone, and about how the hand of friendship reaches out to him and helps him to find his way home.
It was a dark night when Freddie was awoken by a loud bang. The old house was rattling in the wind and the outside gate had slammed shut. His eyes were wide, but he could see nothing in the dark, and as he lay there, frightened by all of the loud noises, with his whole family asleep, Freddie felt very alone. As he shivered in his bed, he heard the rain begin. At first just a gentle pitter-patter, but soon it grew into loud lashings on their old tin roof. In Freddie's imagination, all kinds of monsters were tearing at his house. And then he remembered he had left his sister's special quilt out on the back veranda. "Oh no," worried Freddie, "her quilt will be all ruined and it'll be all my fault." Freddie wanted to go out and save the quilt, but he was just too scared with all of the rattling and lashing of the storm. He huddled under his doona and worried away. After what seemed like a long time, Freddie felt a nudge on his knee. A wriggling wet nose touched his toe. "Oh, hey girl," breathed Freddie. His insides were filled with sunshine as he reached out for his best friend's touch. Her snout, her ears, so soft, so warm, so near. It was too dark for Freddie to see, but Dog was there. He gently grabbed onto Dog's collar and climbed carefully out of bed. Still holding tight, he walked all the way to the back door. He could be brave when Dog was there. He slipped out onto the veranda, and sure enough, there was the quilt, a puddle just spreading towards it. Freddie smiled as he picked it up and returned it to the safety of his lounge room couch. Then Dog took Freddie back to bed. The wind still howled, the rain still pelted, but Freddie was no longer scared. Dog was there, and Dog stayed beside him the rest of the night.
I have a much treasured photograph of my daughter. She's around 8 years of age and she's skipping across the surface of the Murray River. Her hair is flying, her eyes are full of wild joy, and she has a beaming smile. She's surrounded by her half-submerged brothers and father, who are all looking up at her, laughing and smiling at this miracle. But what is the truth of that image? Well, the truth is that just a few minutes before the photo was taken, there was an argument. As sometimes happens in a family, it was a squabble between a brother and a sister, but nothing remains of that squabble in the moment of this image. It is erased completely by the wonder of the miracle. The truth is that the kids were swimming in the Murray because their dad felt an urge, a longing to enter into the pulsing spirit of that ancient and sacred water. The truth is what I see when I look at that photograph. And Jesus went out to the disciples walking on the lake. a miracle, an invitation to enter into the wonder of a moment. Stop and wonder. This is no ordinary moment. Stop and look. Stop and listen. This is the work of miracles. Now, of course, miracle stories mean different things to different people. For some, the truth of a miracle story is that it is proof of Jesus' divine authority. The writer of John's Gospel tells us that miracle stories are told so that we may believe. But for many people, miracle stories do the exact opposite. Miracle stories get in the way of belief. Instead of entering into wonder, some are tempted to logically explain the miracle story. Maybe Jesus was on a sandbar. Or perhaps to discount the wonder entirely so that miracles become a thing of ridicule. As someone close to me said earlier this year, why don't you just go and pray away COVID? Now, of course, there is another response to a miracle story. Just ignore it. As I was preparing for this sermon, I had a look at a number of sources where people said they wouldn't preach on this story. It's just too hard. So let's pretend that miracles are not a part of our narrative and just focus on the stuff we get. Love your neighbour? Yep, got it. And what happens to the wonder of the moment? The wonder that stops us in our tracks, the wonder that makes us look closer. Because seeing in our grim days the shot of the love of God shining through it takes a bit of practice. And the wonder in miracle stories shakes us to look again. And this is the wonder that the writer of Matthew was offering his first audience. Matthew's first audience, cosmopolitan Jewish followers of Jesus under persecution by the Romans. The holy temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. There were tensions between the Jesus followers and some of the Jewish hierarchy, and people feared for their lives. Jesus walking across the sea is an image that would have been as strange to them as it is to us. Caught in the storm of a political moment working to destroy their community, those first listeners hear of Jesus coming to his followers in the most impossible of ways, in their time of greatest danger. To a fearful and persecuted people, this must have been a wondrous, wondrous comfort. Now, perhaps the miraculous act of walking on water may have held literal truth for these first listeners. Miraculous stories of religious leaders were far more commonplace at the time, and it may hold literal truth for you too. But nevertheless, in this story, we are told that Jesus walks on the seas at a particular time for a particular reason. Walking on water was not a simple party trick to boost subscriber numbers. You see, in this story, the disciples are compelled by Jesus to go out onto the water. The seas, a place understood to be full of uncertainty and chaos and danger. These first disciples were not advised to keep themselves safely on the shore, to hide away in the security of their own community. No, they were compelled to go out across the seas. The hope and love of the Christian message was never meant to be secluded away where it is safe and convenient. It's supposed to be shared far and wide. Imagine how this must have sounded to the embryonic church. And it's a call that we hear over and over again as Christians. Be out there. Compelled by Christ, we stand among the chaos and engage fully with a world rich with uncertainty. But then the worst happens. The storm comes, as the storm will always come. And the disciples? They are not safe from the storm. They're in the middle of the sea and tossed and turned with the waves and the wind. Metaphor? Allegory? Do the first listeners hear their own truth in this story? I suspect that the first audience could share in the disciples' fear and the disciples' despair, compelled to risk it all out in the open and then finding that that risk is very, very real. And so, Matthew gives his audience the image of Jesus walking on the surface of the chaos and the danger. In the midst of terror, the light comes and they are not alone. They are not alone in this terrible storm, so far from the safety of the shore. And then Peter, the rock, Peter, the disciple on whom the church would be built, cries out, "Let me do it too. Let me also step bravely into the chaos and the danger. I see that I can do it when I look at you." And stepping out into the chaos, Peter finds himself aloft, even as the winds blow and the sea rages. Held in the light, Peter the rock finds that he can do the impossible. Risk it all and not be overcome. Until, of course, he is. And he sinks like a stone, overwhelmed by his own terror. Now, one telling of today's reading is as a story of faith. If only we have enough faith, then we will not sink in the storm. So, how are you going in the storm that is 2020? The storm, the bushfires, the smoke. Remember how we wore masks to protect ourselves from the smoke? And then the pandemic. Over in China, and the racism and the university struggles and the broken supply chains and the lockdown, and we tried to keep it nice, but the aged care and the remote learning and then a knee on a neck, and we remembered the Indigenous deaths in our own place and the lockdown. The lockdown, it goes on for so long, and the storm. Enough faith? Enough faith to remain untouched by the grief of missing parents or grandchildren? Enough faith to not be overcome by a job loss or financial insecurity? Stuck in the middle of a pandemic with the blame and the shame and the fear and the fatigue, we, all of us, sense just how easy it is to be overwhelmed. So what happens? What happens if we read this miracle story differently? As a story of hope. Because, my friends, Peter is not left to sink. He is held by Christ. His hand is taken, and even though his fear is bigger than his faith, Peter is returned to fullness. Fullness in the arms of his community and in the presence of God. And whether we read this story literally or allegorically, we cannot escape a wondrous truth that is so much bigger than the show-stopping walk on water. Compelled by Christ to brave a place of uncertainty, of chaos, of danger, and faced with the full force of those risks, the first disciples of Jesus found themselves and their community held by God, even as their faith faltered by overwhelming troubles. Miracle stories, they stop us in our tracks. Stop and wonder. Pause so that maybe we can connect with a truth. A friend who rarely leaves home because of a chronic illness, she's now able to participate in life again because so much of it is online. Prisoners who can no longer have in-person visits are zooming into their family lounge rooms to watch their children play. And all of us, all of society, remember that aged care matters. Our vulnerable people matter. I don't know how the storm of 2020 ends, but in these moments, I see that same miracle that the disciples saw. In this storm, even in the depths of this storm, there is light. My hand is held. I am held. You are held by God. It is a wondrous thing, this miracle. And it gives me hope. I have a much treasured story of Jesus, calmly walking on the surface of the Sea of Galilee in a storm. But what is the truth of that story? Well, the truth is that his friends were out there, having felt compelled to risk it all in the face of chaos and danger. And the truth is that even as they were overwhelmed by fear and felt themselves sinking, hands were held.
Jesus calls us here to meet him, as through word and song and prayer we affirm God's promised presence where God's people live and care. Praise the God who keeps God's promise, praise the Son who calls us friends, praise the Spirit who among us to our hopes and fears attends. Jesus calls us to each other, found in him are no divides, race and class and sex and language, such are barriers he derides. Join the hand of friend and stranger, join the hands of age and youth, join the faithful and the daughter in their common search for truth.
So as we sit in our becalmed boats, knowing that it will be a long time before we journey towards a communal shore, is it possible that this time can be for us, this ocean-dwelling time, a space where we finally get the courage to say yes to life? Knowing that the yes that is required is not the yes of external action, but the yes of internal courage. There's a lovely poem by David White which captures some of these themes and shares the story of Jesus walking upon the water. It's called The True Love, and I offer it to you as a meditation, a prayer, a space of opening your heart as we sit becalmed in the middle of this wild pandemic storm. There is a faith in loving fiercely the one who is rightfully yours, especially if you have lived for years and especially if part of you never believed you could deserve this loved and beckoning hand held out to you this way. I'm thinking of faith now and the testaments of loneliness and what we feel we are worthy of in this world. Years ago in the Hebrides, I remember an old man who walked every morning on the grey stones to the shore of the baying seals, who would press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. And I think of that story of the storm and everyone waking and seeing the distant yet familiar figure far across the water, calling to them. And how we are all preparing for that abrupt waking and that calling and that moment we have to say yes. Except it will not come so grandly, so biblically, but more subtly and intimately in the face of the one you know you have to love. so that when we finally step out of the boat towards them, we find everything holds. Everything holds us and confirms our courage. And if you wanted to drown, you could, but you don't. Because finally, after all the struggle and all the years, you don't want to anymore. You've simply had enough of drowning. And you want to live and you want to love, and you will walk across any territory and any darkness, however fluid and however dangerous, to take the one hand you know belongs in yours. A blessing, my friends, a blessing that comes to us from the prophet and the mystic Paul. Go forth into the world. Be of good courage. Render to no one evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the afflicted. Honour all people. Love and serve your God, and rejoice, my friends, even in times such as these. Rejoice in the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.